We also have our city attorney, our deputy city manager, our city manager. So we're going to, I have one adjustment on the agenda, adding item C, which we'll have a conversation about boards and commission liaisons, the breakfast schedule for our stakeholder partners, and then a little bit of some information on the retreat and our goal setting. So we'll wrap the meeting up with that information. We'll go ahead and get started with the fire and emergency medical services.
Before we get started, I have one thing. We had the planning commission, and it's been removed. Could you just give a brief statement just for the folks? Because I know there are people who are asking me about that.
Okay. We did have a discussion scheduled with the planning board to have a conversation about the mineral station action plan. But a couple things regarding that caused us to feel the need to move it. Number one, we have 4 new members on council who need to be briefed and updated on that plan before we can have a discussion with the planning board. And the other is that we needed to get this item C on the agenda, and so we needed time to fit that in, so it was natural for that to move. We have moved to December 12th, a conversation with council updating us on that mineral station action plan, so that when we meet planning board, which is scheduled, I believe we're looking at scheduling that in January, then we'll be up to date and have a much better, much more productive conversation with them. Thanks, Jerry. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Well, let's see. For this evening, we have scheduled an easy topic for the new council. About fire service and sure. We've had some recent developments here, so it just became pretty important for us to schedule this. And I think the intent for this evening here, in fact, if you don't mind, you can move us to the next slide. From a staff perspective, there's really several things that we would like to discuss this evening. And we fully recognize that we've got 4 new council members here, and so there is a lot of conversation that's been taking place, quite honestly, for several years, but pretty heavy conversation the past year. And this is really an opportunity to try to discuss some of that. We recognize that a lot of information is still going to have to be developed, and a lot more conversation is going to have to happen in the near term. So we want to update you on the fire partnership. We do want to discuss how we're going to look at fire service and EMS, that specific approach going forward. We are going to talk briefly about some alternatives that are likely going to be considered here, and then kind of a general discussion of the cost of these alternatives. And mostly, I think it's important to kind of touch on these issues because our fire partners, the Littleton Fire Protection District and the Highlands Ranch Metro District, have asked the council to participate in a joint meeting here Thursday morning at the museum. So again, this discussion this evening is in a large part trying to get the council comfortable with the discussion here on Thursday morning. Okay, by the way, certainly would encourage any questions as we go through this. Don't feel like you got to wait till the end. So if you got some questions you want to discuss, please do.
Just confirming Thursday is our meeting, right?
Thursday, 7:30 at the museum.
And that is public, right?
It is a public meeting. Okay, so we have additional staff here as well, by the way. We certainly have our fire chief, Chris Armstrong, Tiffany Hooten, our finance director, but we've also got Deputy Chief Jeff Tasker, Keith, where's Keith? Keith Reister, he was here. Okay, our Public Works Director. And of course, Randy Young, our Deputy City Manager. So all of us have been thrown into this issue here pretty deep here in the last several months. So we're ready to engage council. So the existing partnership, as you remember, is not only us, but the Highlands Ranch Metro District, the Littleton Fire Protection District. In the staff communication we prepared for this meeting, we also attached the notice that the Littleton Fire Protection District delivered to the two partners here in terminating their participation in the partnership. And that notice was given here on 11/16. The Highlands Ranch Metro District, they have a meeting of the board here this evening. We are fully anticipating, based on prior conversations, very likelihood of them joining the Littleton Fire Protection District and looking to join South Metro. So in effect here, even just by the action of Littleton Fire Protection District, the partnership is over. So as of January 1st, 2019, the city of Littleton will have to be looking at a different delivery here for fire service and EMS. And so the joint meeting here that we've got with our partners here on Thursday morning is really an opportunity to discuss with them kind of the next steps. And we are anticipating that both partners are going to encourage the city council to consider at least one option where the three of us participate in a negotiation directly with South Metro. Staff here recognizes that the council may want to consider other options, but we'll come back to this meeting here on the 30th. Yes, Peggy?
So for clarification, if we are separated, we still have mutual aid. If one of us is burning down, the others will come and help?
Well, I think mutual aid is going to be something that'll have to be discussed, and it's probably a good topic for the 30th.
Okay.
So at this point in time, I think, again, we got a lot of issues that we believe as staff we need to identify. Mutual aid is probably one, but it all depends on the ultimate selection of the service that we pick, so that we're ready here on January 1, 2019.
But, and at this time, the contract goes for a year. They have to turn it in, so we will be operating as is for the next year.
Correct. Yeah, so the partnership exists, historically like it has, through next year.
But a budget issue is coming up
That's correct.
6 months from now.
Yeah, in fact, typically we start our budget process as staff, identifying costs in June. And so we engage our finance director, I think maybe sooner than that. Great. And then we engage, of course, the council later in the summer, August, September, if I remember. September. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about this maybe later, but from a staff perspective, I think we're going to have to be well on our way to making some decisions here by midsummer. Okay. So the fire service and EMS approach, I think it's pretty important that we talk about how we're going to basically approach this challenge here. When I In the staff communication, we kind of had an abbreviated statement here about the problem or opportunity here. And it's much more complex than simply the cost. The cost is important, not only short-term, long-term, but probably one of the most important things we have to define right up front early in the process is what we would call the level of service. So what is it that we would expect? Today we have a level of service, but going forward into the future, whether that's with some other model or certainly as a standalone. So the level of service becomes pretty critical right up front. One of the things that was identified in the staff communication is that, based on our fire service, there is an ISO rating that's ultimately generated based on our cover here that we would have for fire service. And that ISO rating translates into insurance costs here, both as residents and as businesses. So whatever alternative that we look at, I think that ISO rating is likely to be affected by that. So in the problem statement, it's not only cost, level of service, but the impact to the ISO rating. We certainly have impacts to the existing fire staff. And so we've had, I can't remember the number exactly of how many employees we have, Chief.
We're 190.
190 employees and their families. So there is a big change coming to them here within a year.
And that's the 3 partners, right?
That's our entire fire.
Right.
190.
Another issue that's kind of related to this is an overhead cost. And so for over 40 years in the partnership, our partners looked at us to provide all the services. And so that affected multiple departments. And so there was this overhead cost to allocate cost back to our partnerships for fleet, finance, or other related services there. So as we start to kind of pull this apart here, we just have to recognize that we have existing staff, largely in the general fund, that are affected by this dissolution of the partnership. So again, the problem statement is rather complex, and I think it's pretty critical that we define that kind of up front and early. Yes,
I
Carol?
wonder, with all of the complexity of this and given your engineering background, would you be willing to give us kind of a decision-making grid, like an engineering department might do, defining the problem, defining the possible everythings?
Well, I appreciate you appealing to my engineering background, because that's what I'm most comfortable with. In essence, I think that's what we are suggesting, that we develop some kind of a matrix early on so that we can understand kind of the problem statement here, and that it is a little more apparent about how we're going to pull this apart.
And that's what I'm comfortable with too, and I would guess that all of us would be, in that it will provide some clarity for what level we're talking about and what channel it falls in.
And I think too why that's also important is that we are recommending that we hire a consultant here, which we'll talk about a little later here. So I think with those kinds of issues identified, I think that will help define the scope of services here for that consultant.
Thank you.
I think it's real important here on this particular issue that this whole process is data-driven. So there is going to be a lot of information here that we're going to be generating. We are looking to a consultant here to help us critique that, to be objective, help us look at different types of alternatives, make some recommendations, all based on experience. And so the data becomes really important here from our view to make sure the council really is fully informed about the alternatives. Then the alternative analysis itself. There are some multiple options, even though our fire partners, with their departure, kind of narrowed those options. But there's also a little variation of those. We'll talk about that here in another upcoming slide. Of course, pros and cons for any alternative that we develop will be important. A thorough analysis of that. And then again, coming back to a financial analysis of all those options, including not only just cost, again, but how we're going to pay for that, whether it's the general fund, mill levy, or something else. That financial analysis becomes pretty critical in looking at the long-term sustainability of the answer or the ultimate approach here. And then perhaps the obvious, but as we pull all this together, we got to bring it back to the problem statement, the matrix perhaps, and make sure that we have some way to assess which of these alternatives probably meets the problem statement the best. Now, time is not on our side. So we have some pretty big decisions to make in a relatively short period of time. But the public process and communication are still going to be key in this thing. So we recognize that as we go through this here, with the assistance of our consultant, the public process and communication will be, again, pretty important. Okay, so we're going to talk about some alternatives here. This particular drawing was in the staff communication. The center part, which is in blue, is Littleton Fire Rescue. That includes our partners. So the center of it, generally describing this, is the city of Littleton. And then on the east and west of us is the Littleton Fire Protection District within that blue area. And of course to the south is the Highlands Ranch area. To the north is Englewood, which is served by Denver. South Metro is off to the east. And West Metro is now, again, clearly on the west. What is not an option, based on the action that our partners have taken, is first, is that any form of the existing partnership, some had discussed the possibility of an authority with the other two, but now that, based on the action that Littleton Fire has taken, plus what we anticipate from Highlands Ranch, we do not believe that there is any other opportunity there with the existing partners.
What happens if the South Metro District vote fails?
That would certainly complicate things. So, I think there's, in fact, that's probably worth a part of the discussion here on Thursday morning, how the two boards kind of anticipate they'll deal with that particular issue. Chief?
Having, after Littleton Fire Protection District approved their memorandum of understanding with South Metro, there is language in that MOU that identifies what the steps would be if they're looking at a May of 2018 election. If that fails, they have 2 other dates already set to go back. And if they're not able to pass that in those 2 dates, then they'll contract for service moving into the future with looks at alternative dates moving forward. So they have laid some of that groundwork already.
So if it were to fail the first time, they would renegotiate to change language, or what would, I mean?
It would go back to a ballot measure a second time, I believe November of 18, and then a third time in 19. And then after that, they would contract for service at their mill equivalent, which would come out of their general fund, and then they would have discussions about the next ballot attempt, is my understanding from that memorandum of understanding that was agreed upon between the two.
I think we would also assume that Highlands Ranch is probably looking at something somewhat similar with South Metro. I think it's probably worth noting that West Metro, while it was discussed here many months ago as a potential option here for unification, we believe that that is not a viable option anymore, based again upon the action here of our partners. Simply because you're going to have the Littleton Fire Protection District, who are east and west of us, would now be part of South Metro. So West Metro, in essence, if we somehow were to unify it or contract with them, they'd have to come through South Metro to get to the city of Littleton. So we don't see that as a practical alternative anymore.
Well, and isn't West Metro's mill levy substantially higher than ours, so financially it would not be feasible?
That's probably even a better point.
And I had asked, I think, before about Denver as an option.
We're going to get to that. In fact, that's my next slide. I think in the staff communication, we did talk about basically 3 different types of approaches or alternatives here as we look at kind of fire service and EMS. One is a contract for service. So we would, in essence, look to another entity to provide that service. There's little variations of that, but the examples of who we would look to would be South Metro or Denver. In the case of Englewood, that's what they did. They now look to the city of Denver to provide their fire service. EMS is actually through who, Chief, for Englewood?
Denver Health.
Denver Health, that's right. So they don't provide EMS. So again, contract for service, definitely an alternative. We have seen other entities kind of look to that, obviously, Englewood being an example of that. Of course, the second alternative is somehow a unification or a merger. South Metro, at this point, we see as probably the only viable option for that. And then, of course, the standalone fire department here for the city of Littleton. fire service with EMS, and then fire service with a contract for EMS is probably two variations of that. And I think it's important that, these are generally the three different type. You could mix them depending on how you want to approach this issue. And that's kind of the point of the last bullet here, short-term versus long-term. So for example, you could have one alternative as a short-term solution, and then a long-term could be something completely different. There'd be some kind of transition to that. So that's possible, and certainly likely that we'll discuss those kinds of things. Okay, so we as staff have put together a little bit of an estimate of cost here. And I think I want to put a lot of kind of contingencies on this here, because the point of this is that we want to give the council some feel for the cost of unification with South Metro being an example versus a standalone city service. So when you go into the joint meeting here on Thursday morning, you have some kind of context of that discussion. And so what we're going to share with you is really kind of a range of costs. We look at kind of three different approaches here. There's a lot of assumptions in this, none of which have really been fully vetted, and so this is again a kind of a rough estimate. Up to this point, really, staff has done really no work on trying to a comprehensive approach of looking at the true cost of all of these alternatives. So this really is kind of our first attempt here with City Council to start sharing that. I think it's important that we do that this evening, again, because of the meeting on the 30th. And quite honestly, our timeline is now short. And so I think that we're going to have to accelerate a lot of this conversation, and we don't have the luxury of spending over a year or more as we kind of look at some of these assumptions. So I think it's now time for us to kind of get engaged with some of the detail of this. I think when you see the scenarios here, you're going to obviously see that there's a significant difference in the level of service. And so we've picked three alternatives on purpose so that you can kind of see the variation of that cost. And again, the level of service is going to become pretty fundamental right up front. So with that, I'm going to actually look to Tiffany and Chris to perhaps help us talk through some of the work that we've done here.
Council, so I just want to iterate what Mark said. These are very preliminary information. We have not been able to vet fully to get a full cost estimate of what it would look like for a standalone department. With that, we did want to provide some information to council. So we looked at three scenarios that you have before you. The first scenario is to have full fire operations at stations 11, 12, 19 with full EMS service. That essentially is how we're operating today at those three stations. Scenario 2 is full fire operations at stations 11, 12, and 19, no EMS. And scenario 3 is full fire operations at stations 11 and 12, again with no EMS service. Okay.
I just want to make a clarification on these scenarios too, that the way we ran these scenarios is based on the same level of staffing, but not necessarily the same level of service. When we operate as one system, using our fire partners' stations and apparatus and equipment in conjunction with these scenarios and these stations, we get a different level of service than we do through an auto or a mutual aid agreement. So to operate these three stations staffed the same way does not necessarily equate to the same level of service. So I just want to make that important distinction up front before we go any further. Does that make sense to everybody?
Does that have to do too with the equipment that we share now?
It has a lot to do with the way the interoperability of, I guess not a great example, but a regional approach. When all of our 9 stations operate as one group versus 3 stations and utilizing those others now as auto or mutual aid, you get a different level of service. Auto and mutual aid is subject to availability, and it's subject to philosophy. Some people give auto aid, some people don't. Mutual aid is an agreement across the state, but again, it's subject to availability. When we have the ability to send Engine 15, which is in Littleton Fire Protection District, into District 12, which is in the city of Littleton, because Station 12 might be busy on another call, I get a different level of service than having to call South Metro and asking for help. Does that make sense? So the way that we ran these scenarios is staffing those units the way we do today, but operating just those 3 stations impacts your level of service.
So the assumption for scenario 1, 2, and 3 is there's that auto or mutual aid.
We're not really looking at what our service level would be, our response times would be. So we don't know if auto or mutual aid would be there. That would be a conversation we'd have to have with South Metro moving forward. What these assumptions made is how we could staff our stations, Littleton stations, at the current level we do today. We would have to do further analysis to identify what level of service that would provide us.
Excuse me,
Go ahead.
why is Station 13 left out of this scenario?
Station 13 belongs to Littleton Fire Protection District.
And Chief, so scenario 1 shows EMS service, 2 and 3 do not. So would that be an additional expense to contract for EMS?
My opinion would be that most secondary EMS providers, a private ambulance company, if you will, would not charge you to contract that service, but they would take the revenue generated from the transports.
So does any of this include a revenue loss by doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you refresh my memory? What is the percent of calls that are fire versus emergency, roughly?
Roughly, I would say we're somewhere in the neighborhood about 80% EMS.
I want to point out, scenario 3 does not have Station 19. That's the new one we built in Trailmark. So I'm not saying it's a great option, but I just want to make sure you understand kind of the bookends we're looking at here. Scenario 1, again, has all the 3 stations and EMS. Scenario 3 is basically, a much less robust fire service here, no EMS.
We also wanted to note that all these scenarios include fire prevention and education. There are monies allocated for those services. It also includes the dispatch cost, the South Metro that the IGU was just approved. And it does also include emergency operations for the city as well, since that is ran out of the fire department.
Tiffany, you might also talk a little bit about the additional costs that we've added here to cover for kind of the apparatus and also facilities.
So, in addition to fire operations themselves, we also have to purchase EMS medic units. We have to purchase fire trucks, battalion vehicles, capital of that nature. So what we did is we looked at our current needs for fire apparatus, for medics and fire engines based on these 3 different scenarios. And we came up with an annualized cost that we included in our scenarios. One cost for fleet and then one cost for facilities as well, which would include the buildings. We have 2 and 3 fire stations that are going to need upkeep, repairs, replacements, future renovations, things of that nature. And so we've included an annual cost for each of those types of expenditures in our analysis as well. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. I kind of want to explain what this shows here. So what we're showing here are the estimated costs on a dollar value. Scenario 1, 2, and 3. Scenario 1 obviously is the most expensive because that includes 3 stations with EMS service. 2 is stations 11, 12, and 19, no EMS. And again, 3 is stations 11 and 12. So as the number of stations in service goes down, so does the cost. The line that you see across that is roughly at the 8 million level is the estimated cost for the 9.25 mil of South Metro. Kind of gives you a reference of what our costs would be to manage those 3 scenarios versus South Metro. What we also did on the, yes?
So for clarification, so that bar is, should we go to South Metro, that is about where we would be cost-wise?
Yes.
Okay. With full service.
with full service, and capital is included in that as well. The one item that is up for discussion or would be discussed is the specific ownership tax. There's a question on that, which could be $300,000. So we just need to address that at that point.
And so when you say for full service, this line really would be most like scenario 1.
Yes.
It would be better than scenario 1. It would be better than our current service is being provided.
The graph on the right just equates it to a mill levy. So based on the scenarios and the costs that we've included, you can see the mill levy varies from 16 to almost 10. And again, I showed the 9.25 from South Metro as a reference.
Question. So, at 8 million, Chief, why will it be better than what we currently have?
So if we look at system response capabilities, we've already looked at how would we compare operating 3 fire stations, either with or without EMS, versus the 9. And we agree we're better at 9 because we have more resources to bear. Remember that when a 911 call comes in for a structure fire, for example, we'll send 7 apparatus to a structure fire. We have to put what we call an effective response force on a fire based on our critical tasking, which are the things that need to be accomplished in order to mitigate an incident. And we're part of our public protection classification for ISO, our PPC rating is based on that. We currently have a PPC rating of 2. We're a class 2 department according to ISO. If you think about South Metro currently at 17 stations, taking on 3 stations in Cunningham and another 6 stations in LFPD and Highlands Ranch, that system provides more resources than our current 9 stations does. So, for example, if you were to even try to run option 1 by yourself and you had a structure fire, every resource in Littleton would not be enough to put the manpower necessary on that scene to mitigate that incident. And that doesn't even touch the additional 911 calls that continue to come in. Versus when you look at the $8 million roughly that we're talking about with South Metro, if we had a structure fire, we could not only put all the resources we need on that scene to mitigate that structure fire, we also have 20 some odd other stations of resources still available for us to use to handle our 911 calls. This is why our regional approach is so effective in terms of resources and response times. The smaller you get, the more difficult it is, and that's why we're seeing departments like Inglewood, Cunningham, Wheat Ridge merging and consolidating with larger departments because of the resources that they bring to bear.
Thank you.
Makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
If I may, just I want to make a comment here. I think there's always a little bit of risk when we kind of put out, information quite like this. Again, this is our first attempt. These numbers will change, and so this is just to give you kind of a relative magnitude of what it's likely to look like. So when you go into the meeting here on Thursday morning, you just have a little context in that discussion.
I just want to touch on the EMS revenues a little bit. So one thing that I had to account for in my estimates is the loss of EMS revenues if we weren't providing EMS services. The one scenario, we do continue to provide EMS services. While our costs may be split between the partners, the city's portion is about 28%. By all my estimates and what I've seen on our EMS revenues, the city does not bring in 28% of the revenues, just based on our demographics in the city of Littleton. We have a lot of patients in the city of Littleton that are on Medicare and Medicaid, which are capped at rates with the state. And that is not necessarily the same for the district and for Highlands Ranch. So it comes into play, you can't just reduce the revenues by a third or 2/3. It's going to be a reduction that's quite a bit higher than that because of the loss of revenues.
So that brings a question then, if you're contracting for service and you've got that Medicare, Medicaid cap, you know,
It could
it can be
impact.
challenging to get.
It could impact who you contract with, I would
Right.
think, because they're gonna know, they're gonna see that as well, and they're gonna include that in their estimates of, you know, do we want to contract or do we not? I mean, it does play into that.
If you, just kind of adding to that point, if you remember the budget discussion, you know, we had done kind of a 5-year fiscally constrained plan for EMS. It's currently a Tabor Enterprise Fund. And we were sharing with the council that under the existing partnership, even with 3 of us there, that we were looking at financially struggling with that in about 3 years. So we recognize that EMS services financially is a pretty tough enterprise to manage.
Do you want me to continue? Next slide.
Please.
So some of the issues that are going to have to be discussed in the future, depending on which option or direction the council goes. One of the main things is the separation of building and apparatus ownership. You know, for many years, we've shared the costs of our fire trucks and our medic units and even our buildings. And so there's going to be a lot of research that's going to have to be done to determine the values of those assets and for each partner and where that goes. The other I've already talked about, well, kind of future EMS revenues. So one of the things that I have a concern on is the future revenues that we get in on EMS services are for all 3 partners. So there's a question as to whether some of those future revenues that we're going to continue to receive because there's a delay in receiving EMS revenues, will that need to be shared with the partners since they shared in the cost for that? So that's just a question, something that needs to be vetted and researched. We currently have 2 capital leases with fire apparatus that we're going to have to determine, is there a buyout option for that? Who's going to take over ownership? Are they going to take over the lease payments? How that's going to work. The other thing is the contracts with Lockheed Martin and Meadowbrook. We currently have 2 contracts, about $650,000 of revenue that the city receives from those 2 partners that is shared amongst the 3 partners currently. So there's going to need to be a discussion as to whether those agreements are going to continue with the city. Are they going to move to another entity, and how that's going to affect the cost as well. To be conservative, I assumed that neither of those contracts will continue with the city of Littleton just based on the area where they are located.
I'm sorry, is Meadowbrook that light blue area, you know, just to the right of 14, right?
Yes.
Is that, no?
No, it's actually on the west side near Station 13. I don't know if it's highlighted in that map, Jeff. I don't have it in front of me.
Here's 13.
It sits on a corner
yes,
of Wadsworth and C470 area.
It's that light blue area.
It is light blue,
It's
yeah.
on the opposite
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
It's the same color as Lockheed.
You're right.
It's just north of Lockheed, on the other side of C4.
It's under West Metro 14.
Thanks, Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
So those agreements are unknown as to whether they will continue with the city or go with another entity or how they will.
Why would you also make that assumption for Lockheed, given that that's being serviced out of 19, right? And
Well,
is it
what-
19 hours?
It is. One of the scenarios does not include Station 19, so it wouldn't be in the revenue because if we don't own that station or not servicing it, I don't know that we could continue providing service to them. And I kind of feel like the same may be said for the other 2 scenarios, just because if we have less apparatus and less response capability, they may choose to go elsewhere as well. So I think to be conservative, removing those revenues would be.
And what's the revenue just for Lockheed?
So Lockheed is $305,000 and,
3% here.
yeah, and the other is about $350,000.
And remember, we split these 3 ways.
Yes.
With our partners.
What are the contracts with those 2 entities like? When could they inform us that they don't want to continue with Littleton?
I'd have
Pretty
to,
detailed question.
yep,
We'll have to look
we'd
into
have
that.
to
It's a good
review
question.
that.
Yeah, there's termination clauses, but I think they're probably a minimum of 6 mistaken, but I'd have to double check.
I have a question backing up. In terms of what you were talking about, the certain size fires, magnitude, and you said we really couldn't handle those ourselves. How many such fires have there been in the larger area that you're talking about in the last 15 years?
I probably couldn't answer that question, but if we were to try to operate 3 fire stations on our own with our existing staffing levels, so maintaining the same staffing levels. If you think about just a house fire, you know, we have to follow federal regulations, and there's an OSHA regulation that says we're not allowed to go into what they call an immediately dangerous or hazardous atmosphere. We can't send anybody in unless we have 2 people outside to rescue them. It's called the 2-in, 2-out rule. I have to have 4 firefighters on that scene before I can even send somebody in the house. That's 2 engines. Your third one is coming from Station 19 out off of Wadsworth Boulevard. So when you think about it takes 2 people to force entry into a home, it takes 2 to 3 people to advance a hose line, it takes 2 people to search a residence. It takes another 1 or 2 people to do a 360 of the structure and shut off the electric and the water and the gas to make it safe for entry. When you start talking about those numbers, I need an incident commander, I need 10, 15 people on a scene. You wouldn't even have that many people on duty on a given day trying to operate 3 fire stations the way we staff it today. That's the magnitude of what that's just a structure, a residential home. If you had something bigger like a Southview fire, you would not be able to handle it without help from somewhere else.
It seems that we've kind of gotten into an assumption that there wouldn't be the automatic response help. I'm not sure about the terminology, right? And that we couldn't depend upon that. But what would Littleton Fire Protection District do with, say, Station 13? Wouldn't they need the automatic help?
By themselves, South
Yeah.
Metro, they probably would. The biggest issue that, in my opinion, that you run into with aid is that aid is usually expected to be given and received in equal amounts.
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
So if you think about you're trying to operate 3 fire stations and somebody else is operating 20, you're probably not going to be able to give them aid at the same level they're giving you aid. And if you put the shoe on the other foot, you would start asking yourself, why should your citizens give up their resources to another community because they don't have the resources to handle their own call volume? It puts that resident at risk.
We are.
You receive more aid than you're able to give.
We aren't contingent with much of South Metro, so a lot of those stations that South Metro has wouldn't do us much good. They're pretty far away. So
What's Littleton Fire Protection that we would be completely surrounded by South Metro?
Yeah.
yeah, Littleton Fire. Yeah, they would. I'm
No,
talking.
the city would. The city would be completely surrounded by South Metro.
Yeah, the only border you would have that would not be operated by South Metro
Oh.
is their Inglewood.
What I'm trying to get at is you're saying they have many more stations that could help us than we would have to help them. Yet it doesn't make sense to me that they would call upon Littleton, for example, to aid Station 31 or 35 out there almost in Nebraska. So I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't make perfect sense to me yet. That's good.
Chief, when we give aid or when somebody gives us aid, how does that break out when it comes to dollars?
That's why it's mutual.
Yeah, okay.
When we start receiving a lot more aid
Right.
than we give, it becomes disparate.
Sure.
Right? And that's where we run into issues. If we give equal amounts of aid back and forth, then most people are usually open to it. But I would say too that, West Metro has had a history of not providing what we call automatic aid. Denver to our north does not provide automatic aid. South Metro does. We currently have an automatic aid agreement with them. But again, it's subject to availability and philosophy. If they have a new fire chief that doesn't believe in automatic aid, or they have a new board that doesn't believe in automatic aid, that can go away. They're not obligated to provide that to us. So that leaves you with the question of how do I provide service from one day to the next. If South Metro were to have a tanker fire on I-25 and a lot of their resources there at the same time we catch a structure fire, they may not have aid to provide us. And then we're kind of stuck not being able to provide a specific level of service that you may determine you want for the community.
So the idea of mutual and equitable aid, if the city of Littleton decided that South Metro would provide this mutual aid, we could go down to 1 or 0 fire stations and assume that they would just come to our aid. But when it's inequitable like that, that becomes
If you're paying 9 1/4 to live in South Metro's jurisdiction, you probably have a problem with that.
right. That's what I'm saying. So that we would not be able to, we would not provide them the same amount of service that they would be providing us with our 3 stations.
You would not. It would not be because you don't want to. It would be because you don't have the resources to provide it. If you're only operating 3 stations, the last thing you want to do is give one of your 1 or 2 fire trucks to somebody else to use, and then you catch a structure fire and you don't have the resources available for your constituents. It gets hairy, and that's why people determine a level of service for their communities that they want, independent of aid. Aid is really used for larger incidents. It's not really supposed to be used to make up for shortfalls in resources on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's also important to realize too that we always assume that there's no calls going on and everybody's in the station. So the city averages about 5,500 to 6,000 calls a year, so there's a lot of concurrent calls going on at the same time. So you drain your resources that you have, and you're going to be constantly calling mutual aid in, which are farther off, which starts to peel the onion back where you have longer response times, your ISO isn't met because we don't have to response force, but you got to realize there's a lot of calls going at one time. Today we were out of every single unit in our system for 20 minutes or so.
Today, what again?
Today we were out of every single unit we had in the fire department.
How many units we have on the road on a daily basis?
We had 15. We were out of all.
And they were all busy. So you think about Littleton proper, just Littleton proper, we run about 5,000 calls a year. You would be challenged to try to run that many calls with 2 medic units and 2 fire trucks.
If I may, I'd like to try to capture this particular slide here and the issues that need further discussion in context of the meeting here on Thursday morning with our partners. Specifically, the first bullet, the separation of the building and apparatus ownership. I think if we truly are going our separate ways and doing separate things, I'm sure the city attorney could back me up on this, but I think that separation is going to get difficult. And make sure that all 3 of us agree on exactly how we're going to do that. The list of equipment is pretty extensive, and we've been generating that list for over 40 years. So I'm anticipating that that could be a very difficult conversation, and I think it has deep financial impacts to us, and possibly could even look at litigation for some of that. So I would suspect that this is going to be more difficult if we truly go separate ways. I think for the 30th, with the partners, again, we're anticipating them asking the council to collectively as 3 go to South Metro to look at that one particular option. Well, if we truly do that, then it's going to obviously mitigate a lot of these separation challenges, the ownership of equipment and buildings. That could be moot, depending on whether or not the council actually pursues that. So again, a lot of these things are going to be really complex. We truly start to separate and go our own way here, especially in the period of 1 year. Now, again, I just want to go back to the slide here that we put together all the costs for you, and just, I want to make sure that we understand that this, again, is just trying to give you a relative feel for these alternatives as we go into that discussion on Thursday. They will change. It might be less. Those scenarios might be more. But this is our first attempt to try to give you a rough approximation of what those scenarios could look like. So I just don't want us to hang our hat on exactly those numbers, because they will change.
Tiffany, did you have a chance to look at anything regarding how that would affect our Tabor?
If we were to contract or remain as we are?
Yeah, we went under contract.
Well, if both of the partners were to separate from the city, we're no longer going to be receiving those revenues from those two partners. So it's $17 million, I think, we get from the two of them. So that would be, we'd actually have an additional $17 million availability towards our Tabor cap.
Consultant?
Yes, let's move on to the consultant. I just want to,
Do you want to talk about the admin fee or no?
oh, the admin fee. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. You want to describe that, Tiffany?
Sure. So the two partners are contractually obligated to pay the City of Littleton administrative fee. I believe it's 4.9% of their operation costs. And with that, the city receives about $760,000 from the two partners. And that is to offset costs related to HR department, finance department, information services, and somewhat fleet. And then in general, city manager, city attorney, just overhead costs, because we are the ones who are managing the fire department as a whole. So there's going to have to be, we're going to have to discuss how we want to address the administrative fee that we will be losing if the partners were to leave. So it's additional $760,000 that the city will not be receiving from the partners. I think with that, it's an opportunity for the city to look at the departments as a whole and maybe do some realigning with personnel potentially, but that's something that's going to have to be discussed as well.
I might just state kind of up front, I don't think it's going to be realistic here for the city to think that we take $750,000 and eliminate the appropriate staff there to somehow eliminate that cost. Many of these costs, say even finance as an example, just a portion of one person's cost is associated with the fire department, so it's not practical to eliminate 0.2%, 0.2 of a FTE. So I think there will be probably some discussion with the council where we're just going to have to probably retain those staff and have them, as Tiffany was saying, maybe repurposed for something else. But there will be an impact ultimately to the general fund here in some magnitude. May not be the full 750, but in my view, likely some impact to the general fund.
There will be some hard cost savings too. Replacement of computers, servers, things of that nature that we just will not be continuing to do. So there will be some hard costs, but it's the soft costs that are up for discussion.
Question. So then, let's say all three partners go in South Metro then. We, Littleton, then no longer administer the HR and all that stuff, right?
Right.
Who does?
Fire department, South Metro would.
Including the Littleton folks?
They would essentially become South Metro folks. So that was a point I was waiting for Tiffany to finish, is that LFPD giving their notice, we're going to lose 53 of our firefighters. When Highlands Ranch goes, we're going to lose additional firefighters. My calculation, somewhere in the neighborhood of 105 members of our department will be absorbed by South Metro to provide services to those two entities. We do that based on how many seats we fill and what we call a staffing factor. We figure out what that looks like. So we already have some of our personnel going to be affected by this come 2019. So that's important to point out as well.
What's our total count right now for fire?
Our total full-time employees in the fire department is 190. I believe 160 of them are line personnel, what we call firefighter paramedics, and the rest are either dispatch, fire prevention, or administration support services.
So about half, or a little bit more than half, would already be leaving us anyway as a result of LFPD's decision and potentially Highlands Ranch.
So assuming the city does not go to South Metro, how would those staff How would that change?
If I'm not mistaken, and don't quote me on this, I believe we have a layoff and recall article in the firefighter association contract. So it would be determined by seniority.
Meaning those most senior are allowed the option to leave or allowed the option to stay? What do you mean by that?
I think that's probably going to be up to the association. My guess would be the most senior would be given first option to leave. But don't quote me on that.
Okay, well, I put together the next slide here is kind of the use of a consultant. Kind of why the consultant? I think it's perhaps a little obvious here, but obviously the issues that we're going to get into here are pretty complex. And so we are looking for somebody who has had similar experience with these kinds of issues. And this is happening around the nation, by the way. This is not just here. So we are fully aware that other entities here throughout the nation have been wrestling with similar situations here. So we need somebody with that kind of experience. We want a consultant who, as a third party, is truly unbiased and has the ability to critique the information that we as staff generate, look at some alternatives and recommendations, and kind of really help us fine-tune this information here for the council. Again, all data-driven here. We also need a consultant to kind of help communicate with council, local agencies, boards, and our citizens. We just, quite honestly, as staff, we have limited capacity to take on something of this magnitude. So this particular issue on the communication, I think is really going to become pretty central to this function of the consultant. Now, currently, we as staff, we are poised here to hire a consultant. We have had one in the past, and I think we had a council request to understand that particular relationship a little deeper, and we'll prepare a memo, that kind of summarizes our history there. But specifically, we're hoping that this evening, and then the meeting on the 30th with the partners, your direction after these two meetings here will help influence ultimately the scope of services that we might look to in hiring a consultant. And so I think from certainly our perspective and mine specifically, we highly recommend hiring a consultant to kind of help us step through this thing if we're going to start to look at all sorts of different alternatives and scenarios.
As a city or partners?
Right.
At this time, well, I think that's a good question to be asking perhaps the partners. I would have to assume at this point in time, based on what I'm hearing from the two, that this is just the city. Let's see, next slide, is that? That's it. So again, there's a lot of history that's occurred here and a lot of information that's been generated here specifically over the past year. This was intended to try to give you a better feel going into the conversation on Thursday.
I understand that there, of course, are different kinds of consultants and different kinds of fire consultants, and there are the ones that focus on management of fire, and there are the ones that focus on the fire operation itself. What type are you thinking of?
Well, let's see, I may have others help here, but I am looking specifically for somebody who has looked at different options here for fire service, so that when we look at the particular issue, merger, unification, we certainly want somebody who has experience with that to kind of help us understand our particular points of view as we go into that conversation. So that's one of the issues. I think too, I would like to see somebody who has an experience with these kinds of issues in establishing the level of service. So whatever level of service we had in the partnership, while we may use that as kind of a benchmark, obviously that is now off to the side, because what was driving a lot of that was the master plan work that we had done here a couple of years ago. Partnership is gone. So now we're going to have to kind of reinvent or reconfirm the level of service that we want. I want a consultant who's experienced in that. So I'm sure the chief's got his own perspective, Tiffany, others, but from my perspective, that's what I'm looking for.
Are you thinking of redoing the master plan?
No. I don't think that's important at this point in time. I think we will establish a level of service through this discussion, depending on which alternative we pursue. I think that's an issue that probably comes later.
Thank you.
So I got lost somewhere here in a tiny piece. establishing the level of service we want, it seems to me what we said we're having difficulty defining right now with what we've got. Or we have defined what we want, and then we're being told we aren't really at that level. So it's almost like a chicken and egg discussion, I think.
Well, my view, and the chief can help me here, I think under the existing partnership, the level of service was much easier for us to define and understand. Now, as the chief was explaining earlier, now that the partners, we've all split, and if we're truly looking at, say, the alternative of a standalone operation, that level of coverage becomes a challenge, and that establishes a new level of service. So how we staff that, how many people and apparatus that we have physically in these locations based on standalone, that's going to ultimately dictate the level of service. So we're going to have to reinvent that. We don't understand that today. That's why, again, I'd like to have a consultant to help us with that.
So with the consultant, is a part of the scope or need for the consultant to help us decide whether or not we, to give us two choices essentially. One, standalone, and what level of service, what cost, what capital infrastructure that may entail, or equipment, etc., as well as if we were to merge. So would the consultant bring forward those two scenarios for us?
At a minimum, yes. The staff, I think, is able to generate a lot of that information, but we're looking, in my view, for a consultant to help us at least with those two concepts, to thoroughly critique that for us.
And objectively.
Objectively.
Critique it as well. And then from there, that would then help us to make a informed decision, a better informed decision than maybe we feel we have right now. And then from there, further utilize the consultant to help us in either the negotiations or execution of whichever scenario we go through.
Very possible, yes. In fact, I think...
And you have someone, or there are people in mind that do all of the above?
Yes, we actually have one now that we've engaged, but we've also reached out to a couple of others who do show some interest, who have experience in these issues. So again, we as staff feel we are poised to go through a process to ultimately select one, but I think it really depends upon the direction we get from council coming out of at least the meeting here Thursday morning. Quite honestly, there may be other discussion after that meeting on Thursday where you feel like you may have to come back and have another discussion here before we set the scope. But I think based on what we know, we're pretty confident we can draft that scope today.
I agree that we need a consultant on this, just simply because we need somebody to digest this information and give it back to us in an objective perspective, and it is an awful lot of work. But I have a concern. I don't want to get going down the road with a consultant and find out that this isn't working. I don't want to start, we've already had to change courses midstream once. I don't want to do that again. And so I kind of wonder if it might be that it isn't one consultant fits all. It may mean that we may need to source a couple of different experts. On the slide where you had the problem statement and then the second line, which was data driven, and I really think that that's the key. I think that this decision, it has to be a data driven decision. And so, somebody that can create that data and be able to translate it back to not only the council but to the public, and then the public process of communication and then understanding fire. So I'm not certain it's one person or one entity. It may be more. I would offer that I think you should keep your options open on that, and also don't reinvent the wheel. This has been done throughout Colorado, even in the metro area. It's been recently done, and throughout the country. So people have done it and get references of success for whoever we select. I know time is a priority for us, but I think that spending some quality time getting the right group is better than, again, switching horses. It's just
I agree with you. In fact, you make a good point about, thinking about the public participation in the communication. You may find a consultant who's really good at the data, the analysis, not so good at maybe the public process. So in that particular point, in that particular example, maybe a team, a couple of them that actually join together. Because public participation, as we all know, is a challenge in itself. And a lot of consultants specialize in that. So we may be looking for, when I'll say a team.
And further, this is very complicated to explain. I mean, it's in the agreement that we're in now, how it may unfold. So there's a lot of information to be shared. I mean, public, including ourselves, right? So I do think that's a very important part. Can we talk a little bit about timelines? So we essentially have to be ready a year from now at least to
Do something 6 months.
6 months from now, we have to be ready to operate independently if we don't give notice, right? So can you lay out that timeline a little bit for me of what we have to be ready for? What's going to happen if decisions or we don't execute, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's something we as staff are certainly trying to get our arms wrapped around as well here. But, obviously January 1st of 2019, in place, ready to execute has to be the answer. So working backwards, and through our budget process, made the comment earlier, really by the middle of the year, we have to be well on our way. The council has to be very comfortable about where we're going. We may not have all the details, but the answer needs to be apparent right in front of us. Otherwise, if we get too far down the process, the allowing, the execution of the ultimate plan may not be possible. So again, time is not on our side here. So I think from my perspective, I'm thinking by mid-year, we really do need to have an answer. So working backwards from that, I think with the consultants, again, we're ready to kind of execute kind of a rapid approach here based on who we've got interested and have somebody selected here soon. I say soon only because of the holidays. Now, with Christmas coming, that tends to be a problem, but we can certainly manage all that. So by the first of the year, we need to have somebody on board is the ultimate response to that.
On board.
On board.
Contract signed?
How was Highlands Ranch?
Consultant.
With contracts with consultants signed?
Yes.
How's Highlands Ranch engaging with us? Are they doing the same thing we're doing, or are they, what's their involvement right now at this stage? Are they waiting for us to set the tone?
No. In fact, if you go back in time, Chief is going to have to help me here, but there was kind of a preliminary or draft proposal of what a unification could look like for the three partners with South Metro, and that was back in July, was that, or June? June?
Yeah.
June. We, the city, kind of took that and we kind of processed that differently, and so we did not take that as far as our two partners did. They continued to have negotiations with South Metro around that preliminary draft, and you just saw where, of course, the Littleton Fire Protection District had taken that a little quicker, and they got to an answer. And I know that South Metro has been engaged quite honestly with both, and now you're going to likely hear, well, honestly, tomorrow morning from Highlands Ranch that they're going to take the same approach. That's our assumption. So they've just been processing this differently than we.
Was that on City Council's direction?
Yes.
Okay.
If I could just offer up an observation in terms of the timeline. I think that two different scenarios have two different timelines. So if council were to wait until mid-year to make a decision one way or another, one scenario, us operating on our own, is pretty easy from that point forward. Looking at a unification would require further negotiations with South Metro and may not leave you enough time. So if we're looking at just a decision being made about what direction we want to go by mid-year, it could compress your timeline a bit depending on which scenario you land on.
Have we lost the opportunity to operate as, or to negotiate as one unit?
Yes, that is now gone.
definitely
Yeah, because the district turned in their letter.
understood, but I mean, if we were to move quick enough that we come together with, stay unified as a group and be able to go to South Metro and say, you know what, we're all ready to come forward. So instead of some of this individual negotiation that's going on, do you think we can bring it back to the forefront that we're negotiating the whole, or?
Yes, I do believe that. Yes.
I
So-
think that's the goal. In our
That would-
conversation Thursday at breakfast, is
That would be to all of our advantage.
Uh-huh.
Rather than have 3 negotiations, if we go that route.
We're stronger together, and it's like the attorney said, it would be the messiest divorce in history. To the 3 of us separating all of the assets over 40 years and then trying to reconnect those somewhere else. So ideally, we would, and all 3 entities, well, the ranch has told me, and so has the district, that they would rather work with us that direction.
But apart from the mess, the leverage that we would have with South Metro, because then we have more people, more assets, more that we're bringing to the table as well, unified, as opposed to they're getting 5 here, 3 there, 2. I'm looking at it more from a leverage and a negotiating opportunity for it.
So from a service standpoint, the interoperability of all those stations working together like we do today, maintaining the integrity of that system, I think brings a lot of value. So I think we even talked about that at our last review committee meeting, and I think that was what actually really sparked the conversation about bringing the 3 total groups together this week, was to discuss how the 3 of us can move forward together, not necessarily to leverage anything, because honestly I think that South Metro's board is pretty firm in the level of service that they provide and what their costs are. But in terms of the operational ability of the 3 of us staying together and providing service back and forth and not worrying about auto and mutual aid is really about what it's all about. It's the service we're providing our citizens. And that maintaining the integrity of that system is very valuable.
I think too, just trying to put myself in South Metro's position, but if you had all 3 coming to them with the assets and not having to argue about who owns what and the delay, the cost, and how they might have to mitigate that problem, I think they would say, yes, that's much more attractive for all 3 of you to talk to us at the same time.
Not hearing anything about a consideration of the cost, though. Would we want to do that at any cost, or has that cost already been determined?
No, I think that's ultimately the question to the council. The policy question is the cost, the price for what you get, that level of service. Is that what you're willing to pay for?
So we still need to, or do we still need to analyze, with the help of a consultant, the level of service that we're looking for?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, I want to make sure the council feels that they're ready for Thursday. If there's anything else, okay. If there's, Chief, Tiffany, Mark, anything else, or can we go to the next? Okay. All right, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so we'll go to the next agenda item unless a break is needed. This one I have been assured by the city attorney that this one should be 20 minutes.
Maybe not.
Jerry, start the timer.
I will do that now.
So this is,
Tiffany, you can't talk.
yeah, it's fine.
Thanks, Chief.
This agenda item is, falls into our process of having a study session related to something that's going to show up on our business agendas at a first reading that we want to get a little bit more information on before we get to the first reading. So this falls under that caveat, and so who starts?
I can start if you. What this is that a number of cities in Colorado collect their own sales tax. And they have have traditionally had their own sales tax codes with their own definitions. So the definition of what might be taxable in Centennial, say as tangible personal property, and the definition in Littleton could be two different things. So of course, if you're a business, that creates a lot of problems. There are 53 cities that do their home rule cities doing their own collections, and all of them had different definitions. Well, in a number of other states, including where I came from, Arizona, there has been a push towards standardized definitions. That push has also, that's been kind of the first step. Eventually that pushes, we want to take away all sales tax authority and centralize it at the state level with a state sales tax code. In Colorado, there has actually been a legislative study committee to talk about how sales tax might be centralized. The Colorado Municipal League, and I think wisely so, said, let's deal with the types of problems that really exist. Let's not do, for example, what happened in Arizona, where the Municipal League didn't deal with the problems that existed and had change crammed down on them. So, working with the business community, working with the legislature, working with the governor's office, they noted that it would be very, very helpful if the same definitions of what's taxable were the same in Centennial, in Littleton, in Lakewood, that if I'm a business, I know what the definitions are. So the Municipal League, working with a group of tax professionals from all of the cities, has developed, and that's what's before you tonight, a set of standard definitions. 20 cities have so far adopted these, and the intent is that all of the cities that self-collect would adopt these definitions. So that if I'm a business, I know that tangible personal property is going to be the same in Littleton as it is in Centennial, as it is in Castle Rock, and any other city that self-collects. And so these definitions have gone to a number of cities, they've been adopted, and we're bringing them for you tonight. We're not asking you to understand every aspect of sales tax, but the purpose of this is just to introduce why we're doing this. This is really very critical. Sales tax is what funds the city. The general public thinks property tax pays our bills. That's not true. This is what pays the bills and keeps the lights on. And it is I can tell you, coming from a state where they were losing their sales tax authority, it is absolutely critical that we proceed with these standardized definitions. We have a governor who is supportive of the cities. We have, the cities have shown to the Legislative Study Committee that we are willing to standardize our definitions, and that therefore some of the concerns expressed by the business community and others, that listen, the cities are willing to work here, and the cities are willing to do this. So it begs the question, well, what happens if we don't do it? Very simple. There are people who want to attack our sales tax authority. The Legislative Study Committee is not going anywhere. They will be back there, and they will be pointing at every city that didn't do it and say, see, legislature, you need to take away city sales tax authority. You need to pull this back, because the cities won't cooperate. The cities won't make it better for anyone. And so the risk here is that by not doing this, we add fuel to the fire, so to speak, on attacking city sales tax authority, which gets to as I said, this is what pays the bills. Both Ms. Hooten and I both recommend that when this comes to you for first and second read, that the council proceed with these standardized definitions. They are not going to change tax policy. We're not making something that's new taxable. And everything, these definitions aren't doing that. Now, these definitions are going to make it standard, so if I'm a business selling furniture, the definitions I live with in Centennial, I'll live with in Littleton, and I'll live with in Englewood. in any other city that self-collects. That's actually a benefit. Could you imagine if we had the state income tax or state sales tax, that in every one of the 270 cities in Colorado, the state applied its rules differently, how difficult that would be? This is designed to deal with that very type of problem. As I said, there's no items now being made taxable that weren't taxable before. There's no change in what we call tax policy. One of the issues in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and for the audience, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is the constitutional amendment here in Colorado that sets a revenue cap on what local governments can spend. And you can't exceed that revenue cap unless the voters approve it. None of what we're doing here alters any of that in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't touch it a bit. All it's doing is creating these standard definitions so that a taxpayer dealing with local sales tax knows what the definitions are, whether they be in Centennial, or Littleton, or Castle Rock, or Englewood, or anywhere else.
It's solely about just definition. We can still charge or tax.
Absolutely. It doesn't change tax rates, doesn't change taxing.
It's just about definition.
It just changes the definitions. But the important reason for doing this is really critical from the municipal league standpoint, and I completely agree with them, having lived this for the last decade in Arizona, that we do this and demonstrate that, listen, we're prepared to make the sales tax code a usable code. I can tell you there are people who've already approached this legislative study committee and have said, well, the next thing that should be is that you should require all sales tax applications to be filed with the state. And you should then take away local government auditing authority. And then you should take away local government enforcing authority. All of those types of things have been raised. Now, we have been very, very fortunate here in being able to demonstrate you shouldn't do any of that. Those things were all raised and adopted in Arizona. So I say that because that's the type of thing that's at risk here. These definitions, they don't change taxability, they don't change what's taxed, they don't change tax rates. They're not designed to bring in more revenue to the city. They're just designed to provide standard definitions. And with that, I'm happy, or Ms. Hooten's happy to answer any questions that you have. And I think we're done in less than 20 minutes.
So, now last month we did something similar. Are there going to be others like this coming?
I expect we're going to see pushes for more uniformity in city sales tax codes. I wish I could say that we will be doing definitions and we would never have to touch the sales tax code again. That is not the case. The key thing I think here for the cities is that, unlike Arizona, that we be very thoughtful in that we address problems so that they don't become the rallying cry for attacking local government sales tax authority. Are there still some other areas in the code? Yes, sometimes cities have conflicting audits, and that can become a problem. If I'm a business doing business in more than one city, Littleton audits and says, oh, you're fine. Englewood audits and says, no, you owe us money. So there's issues like that that will be coming back, I'm sure, over the next few years to deal with. But if we deal with them smartly and we do the right things, I think, unlike other states, we will be preserving our sales tax authority. And from the city standpoint, that is so absolutely critical. Because, as I said, this is what pays the bills.
Apart from autonomy and control, is there a reason not to adopt it? I mean,
Is any reason not to do this?
yeah, what would be a reason to not?
Some cities would say, well, how dare the legislature push us towards uniform definitions? We're a home rule city, and by the way, we're going to preserve our home rule no matter what. Well, the other side of this story in Arizona, cities took that position. And so the legislature said, well, fine. We're going to strip your home rule. Yes, it's written in the Constitution. But the legislature said, we're enacting law that simply says the state treasurer can withhold any state money owed to you if we think you're behaving in an improper way. And so that's the kind of thing where if cities were to say, well, by goodness, we're going to stand on our home rule, we're not going to do this kind of thing. That's an extreme. I'll grant it's an extreme. But it's not an extreme that we should ever want to see.
The other side of this that you talked about was from a business perspective, this is a business-friendly
Absolutely.
scenario because it just makes one definition that I need to understand, regardless of whether I'm doing business in Inglewood, Littleton, Highlands Ranch for that matter. As you have gone through these definitions, are any of these changing in such a way that they actually, even though the intent is the same, have they become overly complex? So is it making it more complicated, or is it also helping to, through standardization, also simplifying?
I think it's also going to simplify considerably because some of the definitions that individual cities wrote were excessively complex. One of the things that was involved in doing these standard definitions, the Colorado Municipal League, and the Colorado Municipal League, for the audience, is an association of cities throughout the state. They involved the business community in looking and working on these definitions. So there was business community input and there was taxpayer input. And the idea was to create these definitions in a more simple way so I, as an average taxpayer, am going to be able to use these definitions and code in a more effective way.
I actually think it was the business community that brought it to the legislature in the beginning a number of years ago and said, you need to make this simpler.
And if I can just add, one of the ways that it definitely is going to help businesses is if you have a standardized definition. One of the things that businesses run into is that over the years, specific cities have added exemptions to their definitions. So not only do you have to know what the definition is, you have to know, is there an exemption in that definition or is there not? So what the standardized definitions is doing is it's separating the two. So it's separating any jurisdiction that had an exemption in the definition. We're pulling it out and we're making it actually in the exemptions section so that businesses can clearly see what's exempt. A good example is the grocery tax. We have a grocery tax is exempt here. And so it's specifically in our exemptions, where there could be jurisdictions where it's incorporated in their actual definition, and it just complicates it. So by separating the two, it's definitely going to help businesses understand what's taxable and what's not.
So basically, where do we go from here? We'll be bringing this to the council on first read on December 5th, and assuming a positive council action on first read, in Middleton, like in most cities in Colorado, ordinances come to you twice. First read basically schedules the ordinance for a public hearing, and on second read, and they have to be at different meetings. So first read will be December 5th, second read will be December 19th. And that will be when you would act on the substantive ordinance.
And so for council, if between now and Tuesday, if you have any additional questions on this, go ahead and send those to Steve or Tiffany. Include city manager, and then they will respond back to all of council with the answer to that, so that any digestion that needs to be done can be done.
And so as we do review this, and the decision that we'll be making is, we understand the intent of this now, the value of this now. What further review would you recommend we do, as far as should we go through the detailed definitions or any of that?
I don't think, certainly council members can read all the definitions. If you have questions, you can ask us. I think the more important thing for council here to consider is the policy implications of making the choice to do this or not to do this. Because I think the critical thing for the council is the policy implications for doing this are that we are demonstrating that cities are responsible with their sales tax authority, and the legislature doesn't need to get involved in doing things to cities. The policy implications of saying no are that I think we will be adding fuel to the fire about coming after cities and their sales tax authority. And that's really the question I think council wants to focus on, is this policy question of should we do this or not?
I do want to answer, there was a question that came through earlier today, I believe from Councilmember Cole, regarding the harvesting of sheep's wool. So that would be considered non-taxable because it's essentially a wholesale item that is part of a final product. So it would be tax exempt.
So until if the wool turns up in something that is being sold.
Manufactured or something sold,
whatever,
yes.
then that's when it's taxed.
Yes.
It seemed to me, and I'm sorry, I can't remember now where I saw something else in our code that seemed a little inconsistent with that. And why I can't remember where I saw it, sorry.
Well, we can certainly go back and look at it, but from our standpoint, it would be considered non-taxable.
Anything else on this, council?
Mayor, if I just one comment here, just to add to this, having worked in a state where they did centralize all the sales tax collection, from a city perspective, it was kind of this black box calculation. So the city was not understanding kind of a forecast of what sales tax could be. And so I think that puts cities at a disadvantage. So having more control over that kind of minimizes that problem. So
There's lots of concerns with the state taking over tax collection.
Just the word state taking.
But they're here to help. They're here to help.
I mean, I think one of our biggest concerns is the audit aspect of sales taxes. If the state's collecting all sales tax, then we have to rely on them to do audits, and we already know they don't do probably as many as they prefer, and it's probably larger corporations that may or may not impact the city of Littleton directly. And so I think it's important to keep our home rule status so that we can essentially manage our taxpayers and audit when we feel necessary and collect when it's due to the city.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Council, does anybody want to take a break, or do you want to just go through it?
We can continue with Helmy.
That's okay.
What is our next subject?
Board and commission, breakfast, retreat, housekeeping.
Stuff.
Okay, so
Months ago,
part
at
of
a city council meeting.
what, everyone, part of what getting started as a new council, we have a number of housekeeping things to take care of. I'm gonna call them housekeeping. I'm gonna start with the liaisons. So part of what I did when considering the liaisons for everyone was I asked everyone what their preferences were and was able to accommodate, I believe, everybody's, plus more. So I'm going to pass out a couple of documents. One is a city document that sort of explains the city council liaisons and the role of the mayor in making decisions and kind of how that's incorporated. And then also what the liaison duties are. And they will vary from the board and commission that you're on. So in the instance of, say, Denver Regional Council of Governments, it's a lot more active liaison than it is because you're a voting member of that group. What you see here on council liaison duties is more related to our museum, library, in-house boards. So.
And maybe we're passing those out. I was going to ask the attorney, your position on like the planning commission. In the past, it's always been quasi-judicial, so we probably should stay away from that.
Yes. Much of what planning commission does is in a quasi-judicial capacity, and it's the same as the council when it acts on those cases. Occasionally what you get is you'll get agendas, in fact, probably more than occasionally is, that you'll have agendas where we'll have a quasi-judicial item and we'll have planning commission acting in a non-quasi-judicial capacity. But then it gets very confusing for the person who's there because, well, this one I can be involved with and this one I can't. And so that would be the type of thing I would recommend staying away from.
So that's consistent with what we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can all see what everybody's been assigned to. In some cases, for example, under Jerry, the urban drainage and, oh, I really typed that wrong, urban drainage flood control district, as that is required to have either the mayor or the mayor pro tem participate on that. So he would become an alternate on that if there was a meeting that I couldn't be to, also because of being a voting member. So I wanted to go a little bit into a conversation about some of the big ones, and that's DRCOG, Arapahoe County Transportation Forum, CDOT, and these are, we know what DRCOG is. We know that it's a regular meeting and you're a voting member, and Karina has asked to do that, and I'm very thrilled with that. I think it would be very representative. The Arapahoe County Transportation Forum, I put you there also because that is a baby group right now. They're working on gaining an agenda and a motivation, and there is an awful lot that is going on in the transportation arena in the metropolitan area. This is also an opportunity for us to be at the table where this money is, and we have not been active there in the past as we should be, and we have a number of large transportation projects that we need to get done, and when you're talking $100 million, it'd be nice to get some scraps to help pay for that. So that is not a well-formed group at this point, but I've put you there because I think it's going to be a good tie-in with the DRCOG. I have an email with a bunch of that information from them on it. I will send that to you. I would not worry about it at this point. We also have staff. Keith did disappear.
He did.
But Keith is very active with these groups and what's going on, so he's going to be a good staff resource for us on what we need to do and how we need to do it. And we may have a conversation with him on that. And then Kyle on the CDOT, we're really getting very active with CDOT in terms of the Santa Fe group. And so there's a lot that we're trying to put together with that. Littleton has taken the lead on that. And so I put you there. That's also an opportunity then for there to be alternates between the two of you because the information is going to be very similar. So once these things start to gel and we see what's really going on, then we can have a little bit more discussion. Now, I realize we want to be conscientious of your time commitment, so we want to make sure that that works. At this point, the CDOT is minimal to no time. There may be an email, there may be a quarterly meeting or something like that, but staff is handling most of that. The same thing with the Arapahoe County Transportation. So as those things start to solidify into something, we'll have more conversation. Are you guys okay with all that?
Mhm.
Okay. And I guess that's it.
Cool.
Any questions on any of that? Everybody good? If you have any questions about the museum board or any of the city boards or commissions, Wendy is the coordinator for all of that. She can give you any information on meeting dates and stuff like that. And Carol, the Fine Arts Committee meets on Thursdays. So I think that would work for you.
How about the Littleton Business Chamber? Is it worth having somebody join in on that, which I'd be willing to do?
Sure. I mean, I'm a member. Who
Yep,
else is
I'm a member.
Okay. And I think the city's a member.
Yeah, I paid for a city membership, so I think, quite honestly, any council member could probably go.
I'll give my $100 back.
I'm sure they'd be happy to give you that money back.
I'll put that one down also.
In that regard, if 3 of us do show up to that meeting, do we need to coordinate?
What, if you're gonna have 3, then what we want to do is we can work with the city clerk and indicate simply on an agenda that 3 of you are gonna be present, but you're not gonna be taking any action. And just don't do any policy decision-making there, because then that creates a problem. But we can certainly look at with Wendy.
So we can go as members, but not necessarily, but not
But
represent.
not go there and discuss, and if they're gonna discuss an item, say the chamber's gonna take a position on the fire issue, that would be a meeting that 3 of you should stay away from.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to also, Jerry had brought up the planning board, and so Jerry and I met this past weekend, and we chatted about this, and Mark Rudnicki, who's the chair of the planning board, had reached out, and Karina had also mentioned that there was a desire to have some more communication with the council than what they currently have. So I think that the best way to handle that is to have our pro tem, who's also served on the planning board for quite a while, 12 years, work with the chair as needed, not attending the meetings because of the quasi-judicial. That's always been something we've not wanted to. But I think that sometimes the planning board may be looking at we may not have as many breakfast meetings to give them as much ongoing info. So Jerry and Mark will have that level of communication, and then as there's something that needs to be brought back to council, Jerry will bring that back, and Mark will take his back to the planning board. So we're going to try to see if that works.
That's your first
Don't
meeting.
drop our iPads. Okay, everybody good on all that?
Wasn't there also a South Platte working group?
Yes,
And
and I am on that.
Are you still
Yeah.
here?
Yes. The last one.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's PWG.
and what's ACMMC?
That's Arapahoe County Mayor, Manager, Commissioner, and Commissioners. And that's the Arapahoe County mayors, city managers, and county commissioners get together
Every 2 months.
every 2 months in a different city and share information. Urban Drainage Flood Control and Metro Management. Oh, I did want to mention on the Littleton Fire Rescue Board, I'm the liaison on that right now, but based on all, the changes, and if we get a consultant in, I don't know that board, that we're going to be meeting anymore. We have a meeting next week, I think, and next week or
December.
the week after.
Yeah, I think it's a week
Next
after.
week.
Okay.
Yes, it is, sorry.
And so I will plan to attend that, but I put here temporary because I just don't think that that's going to be ongoing. If there is some discussion that will require something like that, then I would bring that back and see if there's some additional interest. So that is more info on that after I learn more. Okay.
So Deb, on these, some of these are city boards commission. But do we just show up at some of these other things, or is there some kind of notice from the city, this person has been appointed?
My understanding is that Wendy will notify the chairs of the boards and commissions who their new
Like the
liaison is.
CML Policy Committee, for example?
I've already notified Kevin.
Okay.
And if we can just get a general general acceptance of Peggy on the CML Policy Board, that's all. The CML Board just needs to know that the council knows about it and supports it. And then so they'll take me off and you'll be on.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay.
That's not considered a formal action.
No, I don't think you have to do that as a formal action.
Thank you.
It's just the council knows about it, it's okay, and that's all CML. They don't need a vote.
Acknowledge and support.
Yeah, they don't need a vote, so. Okay,
And if I may, just to your point, I'll make sure that Wendy, we follow through on the notification of all these entities, just to make sure we've covered that detail.
perfect. Okay, so the other thing that I really want to get consistent and make it very intentional is our breakfast meetings that we have with our various stakeholder groups in the community. And I think that we've been a little bit inconsistent. I have an extra one there. A little bit inconsistent with it, so I think this kind of gives a plan. Do you have enough?
I think we're good.
Okay. This gives a plan. It lists the ones, trying to keep it like every other month as opposed to every month. It gets a little bit burdensome for schedules. The breakfast meetings are typically on Thursday. They're 7:30 to 9. We try to end it by 9 o'clock. Primary stakeholders have always been the Littleton Public Schools. We just met with them, so that schedule would be, probably end of the year again. Historic Preservation Board, we meet with them annually and sometimes more if needed. Planning also. South Suburban Parks and Rec, that's a very important meeting that we have with them. Again, it's stakeholder relationships. They have actually requested to meet with us in January. They have 3 seats that are termed out, and they have an election in May. So the chairman has asked that we meet in January. They meet our new council, and we look at a work plan, what we need to work on with the current group. Tri-City, that kind of depends on if we have something to talk about. That's with Sheridan and Inglewood. We do have the CDOT thing that's going on. If there is a reason to meet, then we will meet. I've asked Mark to express that we would like to host the next one. So that is tentative as to when that...
Spring, roughly, is my guess.
Yeah, typically in the spring, and we'll have a month or more notice on
That one be upstairs?
Yeah, I think we held it in the police conference rooms. The last one I remember we hosted here.
It was a great meeting, nobody showed up.
Yeah.
I mean, we showed up.
I remember.
Yeah, Inglewood has been kind of lacking lately.
Yeah. Well, I think the Santa Fe PEL process, the CDOT, I think is going to rally us all, is my guess.
Yeah, it affects the 3 of us, yeah.
And then South Metro Housing Options, we haven't met with them in a while, and I think that we've got enough things that are going on regarding, the housing, and we've got a housing study that we're going to be going into, the Geneva Village issue that we're dealing with. So I think that would be a successful meeting. Kelly runs I don't know what she calls it, I call her a marketing group, and she has looped in marketing people from throughout the city. So Aspen Grove, many of the bars and restaurants downtown, many of the shops, many of the businesses, many of the event places, the Falls, Hudson Gardens. These guys, they meet on I think it's every other month or so, and they talk about what each other's doing, and then they connect on ideas, and they kind of build the synergy. We had a breakfast with them a couple of years ago when they kind of first got it started, and it was incredible to learn what these guys were doing. And what was going on and how they were working together. And so I think it would be great for council to see that again now that it's an even more dynamic group. And it really gives you a lot of good information about what's going on and who's working together, and helps to, you could share that information about, the events in the city. So that is kind of based on what their schedule is and when we can get fit in. And then the other one I had listed here is the Senior Service Aging Well Resource Center. Have that group come in along with the Immigrant Resource Center and just share with us kind of what they're seeing in the community, what they're doing, what's going on. I think that will help kind of provide a good basis for us to know more about those two very important populations in our community. I haven't met with them before. So that's kind of the layout. If anybody has anybody else they want to add, like I said, we're going to try to keep it to every other month. Right now I have a little more than that.
I don't think we've ever, or it's been a while at least, that we've met with the liquor board.
For breakfast or?
Happy hour.
I'm flexible. Yeah, but that's a rather important board as well.
Well, I will, in the event, there is some legislature going on now that Peggy will be meeting, the policy committee meets in December, early December, and there's some legislature going on regarding 3-2 sales and how that's, and there's, I think there's 3 different,
3-2 sales?
Yeah, it's,
God, they still sell that stuff? I mean, I drank a lot of it one time.
well, that's part of what the legislature is, and what is that impact, and what will that impact be in communities? And so there's, right now, it's kind of in the baby stages, so when it culminates into something, I think that might be a great opportunity to sit with them and kind of, and we may even be able to invite one of the lobbyists from CML to help share some of that information and walk us through
Does
it.
that board have a heads up on legislation?
No, but we can certainly give them that heads up. Yes. And we will certainly do that.
Okay.
And Debbie, isn't there a breakfast coming up soon? Is it one of these, or is it?
No, the Thursdays.
This
This
Thursday.
week is the fire partners.
No, another one, I thought, with the city.
No, we canceled that.
Yeah, we had historic preservation, but I think just based on the election, we decided to postpone that one. So that was the one that was scheduled, I think, a few weeks ago or something.
Yeah.
originally.
I thought it was something with other cities or other city mayors and things like that. But I might be wrong. No? Okay, good.
Yeah. Oh,
Carol?
I'm sorry,
Is there
yes.
a regular, like the 4th?
I think it's usually the third Thursday, which,
The 3rd,
yeah.
and then we'll meet again, or the next one will be January?
Yes, for South Suburban.
January 3rd. And then another thing is, since these are regular meetings, do these get video recorded?
No.
No.
They're really not regular meetings. They're kind of a opportunity to just have a broad-based discussion with stakeholders. Depending on the number of folks, we sometimes have to move them to the museum. It's bigger. So we do have Wendy, on the ones where we meet with the planning board with our quasi-judicials, we do have Wendy come in and she takes notes. So we can capture the actions. We learned the hard way on that one, but we learned.
And it is the planning commission, you know.
Yes, it is. Did you?
I think what Karina might be referring to is, I think we are hosting the Arapahoe County City Manager Council.
Yeah, that's,
When is that?
but that's not, the council does not go to that.
No, I think that's,
Yeah.
just,
Oh, okay.
That's
I
the
think that's
Arapahoe
better.
County mayors, managers, and commissioners. And that's just, we just get together and have a little breakfast, and you go around the table and tell everybody what you're doing in your city. And then the commissioners tell us what they're doing, and then from that, I bring back to the council anything that was important.
Oh, so is that this ACMMC? Got it.
Okay, so if everybody's good with that, then we'll get started on the scheduling for these. And then as soon as things get scheduled in, we'll get emails and so we can calendar them in. So, then the other thing, we are planning a council retreat. And what the intention of the retreat is it's not a workshop, and it's not a kumbaya, we're not doing that. It is an opportunity for us to meet. We're going to do it, it's going to be one day. We're looking at doing it on a Friday in January. Oh, no, excuse me, February 2nd is the date that is most opportunistic at this point. We're looking at doing it.
Groundhog Day.
Oh, there we go.
You better not wake up the next day in the same place.
Groundhog Day.
We're looking at doing it at the Falls Event Center. It's always kind of nice to get out of our traditional community room. And I've asked the city manager to see if Kevin, who we have worked with before, if he might be interested in facilitating. And by facilitating, it's primarily keeping us in a trajectory, not a facilitation of, raw emotion. We're not doing that because we have too much work to do. We have got a lot of things that have to get going, and a lot of that has to start with us and our goals and our priorities. And that is really what we're going to focus on this retreat. So the council, so that staff is able to walk away from this and have a lot more clear direction of what the council would like to see happen. I will be meeting with each of you either by phone or coffee individually to kind of get prepped on your goals and priorities so that we can start to put together a format on this. And Kevin will probably also reach out to and do a quick interview with everyone. The other thing that we would talk about, we'll go through our protocols and legislative procedures, because that's just some housekeeping. We need to get that done. Mark has a couple of ideas which I think are good. We're not going to rewrite these things. We'll take out things that aren't necessary. If we need to tweak something, we will. But everybody will get a copy of that prior and can look at it. And if you have any thoughts or concerns, we'll probably have about an hour at the retreat where we'll hash that stuff out. It's also a good chance for the new council members to kind of learn what we've adapted and adopted as our protocols and how that works. And I think we should have an honest discussion about, the ones we aren't following and why we're not following them and should they be there and who's enforcing. So, and then we want to have a conversation. We're not sure what this looks like yet, but we need to have a conversation about vision to comp plan to code. That is a huge piece of work that is looming, and I don't know that it's a 10-year project out there. I think it's much more manageable than that, but I think that we, as a council, need to finally be definitive about our expectations and our intentions with this. And that will be what gives staff the go and the move. And I think we set expectations back to staff as to what we need for that, because it should not, this council, we're 2 years together. This council should be the ones that it's finally done. So let's make that happen.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Amen, sister.
And then
On that, if I may, Mark, you laid out a plan though on, revising codes and other zoning and stuff like that that sort of led to the comp plan also. That might be something you might want to just give us another 10 minutes at some time.
You bet.
Not
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah, because there's a couple of pieces that kind of play into this. There's
Right.
kind of these short-term pieces that we're trying to improve the code on. In fact, Steve, our city attorney, is working with staff to try to make sure that we stay on a schedule for that. But I agree with the mayor. I think it is time for us to define the council and how you want to approach kind of this vision to comp plan, the code issue in the bigger sense, and to execute it.
That's why the plan you laid out a while back was pretty good. Because I really think 3/4 of the comp plan can just be say, yeah, that's done, get rid of it. I mean, that should be done with the neighborhoods. And we make such a big issue. In the 90s, 99, when I first got on planning commission, we talked about this.
We have the history.
And I'm just tired of talking about this. I'm just do it.
I think we're ready as staff to execute this.
yeah, get it done.
Well, on that, I think there might be something to keeping the plan with those things in it, but saying, done. So that in 2 years, if somebody gets senile, the new council comes in, whatever, they say, oh, we should be doing, and there's not a record that says, look, we had this stuff, we did this, here is the statement. It just, and it also, I think, is helpful for us to not feel like we're just treading water. You can see, we maybe even put the year, completed.
I think there is some value to that, but when things like Windermere are going through the mineral, it's not going to happen because now it's all residential and things like that.
That was already taken out though, so
Yeah,
those types of
the
things. So
things-
some of the cleanup already happened in the neighborhoods, and I think, Peggy, maybe some of what you're also suggesting is, I think we have some of this. So when we, these pieces were in work plans of neighborhoods and corridors and activity areas of what were priorities, et cetera. So some of that has already been laid out, but we've tabled them or we haven't continued. So some got done and some are restarting again. So I think let's lay it all out, and to your point, let's commit to, we have 2 years. So what is it going to take to truly get all of these pieces done in 2 years and understand time, money, and output? And I think that's what we need to commit to.
That's, staff's behind that. We're ready for that.
Good.
Good.
But I think maybe a historical section of some sort of,
Whether it's
They
actually
don't go
in the
away.
plan or outside the plan or.
somewhere to be
somewhere.
found, yeah.
Okay, great. So, that's about all I have. A couple little
If I may, Mayor, just quickly on Kevin King, for those who are not familiar with him, I'll just send to all of council his resume just so I have a little bit better understanding of his background.
Yeah, Kevin facilitated a workshop for us, and it was very, very good. And I think what we're really looking at with a facilitator is, as you can see, just someone who can keep organized what we're talking and thinking, because I think we don't want to restrict our flow of thought and our creativity and our energy, because that's where we come up with the best stuff. And Kevin, I think, can keep that managed so that then after the retreat, we can remember what we said. And it also gives staff a real good direction too.
So will he have a chance to meet with the new?
Yes.
folks?
Yes. Yeah.
Because he met with us and got to see what kind of works we have.
Yes, he will. We will. Mark and I will be meeting with him and kind of walking through what we're looking at with the retreat, and then he'll reach out to everyone and have a chat. So I am going to re-establish the cold box lunch, for council on study session nights. We have a number of council members that are working full-time jobs and racing to get here after work. And so you will receive an email from probably Becky Fye regarding choice for dinner on a study session night.
Sandwiches, salads.
Sandwich or salads. And so please make your selection, and they will be here waiting for you. If you can get here a little bit early and eat before the meeting starts, that's great. If not, we've eaten during the meeting. But I don't think it's tough to get across town anymore, and when you've got a full-time job, it's tough to get home and get dinner and then get back here. So please know that you can take that worry off your list, and we'll have that for you.
I was planning on a diet.
A 2-year diet?
I hear there's salads.
And then we will also, behind the dais, we will have a selection of more healthy snacks, because again, while we're not going to have dinner on a council night, I do think that, I know Jerry usually runs in and hasn't had dinner, and we can sit there and go till 10 o'clock.
And yet I keep this boy's figure.
So I think that those are things that just, you need your nourishment, and we need to stay, awake and dynamic while we're doing this. And those are just little things that have kind of just fallen apart. And I think those are things that are just the little details that are important for all of us to think about in terms of our health together. And we are also going to serve coffee and beverages and cookies at all our study sessions and at our regular council meetings. I think that the public who comes in, many of them may have also missed dinner, or they're sitting through a 3 or 4 hour meeting, and a cup of coffee and a cookie will not kill us. And I am also lifting the ban on food in the council chambers. If they want to bring a cup of coffee, and the carpet's so beautiful in there as it is, I'd hate to. I mean, you can
Another
bring in
spot.
a coffee and
Yeah.
a cookie and not miss the meeting. So those are just a couple little, like I said, little nitty, little housekeeping things. But I think it's, some of that's important, and it kind of becomes more important. So,
Water on the dais?
yes, and we will have
Oh,
pitchers of
yes.
water on the dais. We're not doing bottled water. We'll have pitchers of water, and then if you do want, if there is a demand for coffee back there, we will put a coffee back there for council. If not, you can grab a cup in here and take it in. You will also have cold sodas. So if you have a specific, something that you want, let Wendy know, and we'll get that taken care of.
Becky's actually going to reach out to you
Oh, Becky,
and see what
okay.
you want for drinks.
That way we don't have a bunch of stuff nobody wants.
Yeah.
So,
Are we going to have winning lotto tickets too?
so, that's all I've got. Does anybody else have anything?
You got her.
Okay, so really looking forward to working with everybody. We have 4 new council members, but I think that,
But I like that part.
but I don't feel like they're all that new. No, I don't think they're all that new. They've been engaged in the community and ready to hit the ground running. So we have our first regular meeting next Tuesday. Looking forward to that. We'll see you guys all then. We're adjourned.